A stranger once said, "The smallest act of kindness can quietly rewrite the biggest destiny." And on a cold Oregon morning, Ethan Brooks was about to prove those words true without even knowing it. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the rooftops when a line of glossy black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of Ethan's weathered little farmhouse on the edge of town. Their polished paint reflected the pale morning light like mirrors, completely out of place beside the cracked gravel driveway and the faded pickup truck that had faithfully carried Ethan through years of honest work. Men and women dressed in tailored suits stepped out one after another with calm precision, their expressions serious but controlled, while neighbors slowly peeked through curtains, wondering why such extraordinary visitors had come to the home of a mechanic who spent every weekday repairing other people's engines and every evening making pancakes for his 10-year-old daughter. Ethan stood on the front porch wearing worn blue jeans, an old flannel shirt, and work boots still dusty from yesterday's shift. One hand rested gently on Lily's shoulder as she clutched the sleeve of his shirt, her curious blue eyes fixed on the strangers. Neither of them understood why so many important-looking people had arrived before breakfast. Then the final SUV door opened. A tall woman stepped onto the driveway with effortless confidence. Her charcoal business coat, silver hair, and composed expression carried the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions before lunch. Victoria Lancaster, the celebrated CEO whose face appeared on magazine covers across America, slowly removed her sunglasses and stared directly at Ethan. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The crisp autumn breeze rustled the maple leaves around the porch while the entire street seemed to hold its breath. Behind Victoria stood attorneys, executive assistants, and discreet security personnel, but none of them dared interrupt the silence. Lily squeezed her father's hand a little tighter. Ethan remained calm, even though questions raced through his mind. Had someone made a terrible mistake? Had one of his customers filed a complaint? Had something happened to the young woman sleeping inside the guest room? Before he could ask, the front door quietly opened behind him. Claire stepped outside wearing one of Lily's oversized sweaters, her long blonde hair loosely tied back. Her face pale but peaceful compared with the frightened woman Ethan had found the previous night. The moment she saw Victoria, every trace of comfort disappeared from her expression. Her eyes widened, her breathing caught, and tears quietly gathered without falling. Victoria took one careful step forward. The executives exchanged uncertain glances. Ethan instinctively turned toward Claire, confused but concerned, unaware that the woman he had rescued from a lonely roadside only hours earlier was standing between two completely different worlds. Claire looked first at Ethan, then at Lily, then back at the woman waiting in the driveway. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Mom, please don't blame him. He saved my life." And with those simple words, the quiet life Ethan Brooks had spent years building began to change forever. 24 hours earlier, Ethan Brooks had no reason to believe that anything about the day would be different from the hundreds that had come before it. The steady rhythm of his life had become as dependable as the old clock hanging above the kitchen sink. Every weekday began before sunrise. He brewed a pot of inexpensive coffee, packed a simple lunch into a worn metal container, and quietly prepared breakfast while 10-year-old Lily sleepily shuffled into the kitchen wearing oversized pajamas and carrying the stuffed rabbit she had refused to replace since kindergarten. Their little farmhouse was far from perfect. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, the kitchen cabinets needed fresh paint, and the porch leaned just enough to remind Ethan that another repair would have to wait until he could afford it. Yet every corner of the house carried warmth that money could never purchase. Family photographs covered the hallway walls. Fresh wildflowers picked by Lily sat in an old mason jar on the table, and laughter seemed to linger in the air. Long after breakfast ended, Ethan worked as a mechanic at Miller Auto Repair, a small garage just outside town where customers trusted him because he fixed only what truly needed fixing. His hands were rough from years of honest labor, but his reputation was built on something even stronger than skill. People knew that Ethan Brooks never took advantage of anyone. If a repair could wait another month, he said so. If an elderly customer could not afford a bill, he quietly found another way. His coworkers often joked that he would never become rich because he cared too much about doing the right thing. Ethan simply smiled every time he heard it. Ever since losing his wife several years earlier, success had stopped meaning promotions or expensive possessions. Success meant seeing Lily smile every evening when he came home safely. It meant paying every bill on time, even if it left little behind. It meant building a peaceful life where kindness mattered more than appearances. As the afternoon faded into evening, Ethan locked the garage after finishing one final pickup truck. The October sky had turned a deep gray, and light rain began tapping against the windshield as he started the familiar drive home along the winding county road. He planned to stop at the grocery store for pancake syrup because Lily had cheerfully reminded him that Saturday mornings were impossible without blueberry pancakes. The windshield wipers moved steadily across the glass while country music played softly through the aging speakers. Everything felt ordinary until a faint figure appeared ahead near the shoulder of the road. At first, Ethan thought someone had abandoned a pile of clothing beside the ditch, but as his headlights drew closer, he noticed movement. A young woman sat alone on the wet grass with her knees drawn close, her elegant cream-colored coat soaked by the rain, one shoe missing, her long blonde hair falling across her face as she struggled to remain awake. Several vehicles passed without slowing down. Ethan eased onto the shoulder, shifted the truck into park, and quietly whispered to himself the same words his late wife had once told him many years before. If you are in a position to help someone safely, you do not drive away. He stepped out into the rain without realizing that a single decision made in simple kindness was already setting extraordinary events in motion. The young woman barely reacted when Ethan knelt a few feet away, careful not to startle her. Rainwater clung to the loose strands of her blonde hair, and her hands trembled from the cold as she stared at the wet pavement without really seeing it. "Ma'am," Ethan said gently, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "Are you hurt?" She blinked several times before slowly looking up at him. Her blue eyes were glassy with exhaustion, carrying the distant look of someone whose mind had simply reached its limit. She tried to answer, but only a faint whisper escaped her lips. Ethan noticed no signs that she had been harmed. Instead, she looked completely drained, as though she had spent days carrying a weight no one else could see. He removed his old flannel jacket and carefully draped it over her shoulders. "It is getting colder," he said with a reassuring smile. "Let us get you somewhere warm." She hesitated, glancing toward the empty highway as if trying to remember why she had been there in the first place. After several silent seconds, she nodded almost imperceptibly. Ethan opened the passenger door of his pickup truck and waited patiently while she climbed inside. He never asked for her name during the drive. He never questioned where she came from or why someone dressed in expensive clothing had ended up alone on a deserted county road in the middle of a rainy evening. Instead, he turned the heater to its highest setting and quietly handed her the clean towel he always kept behind the seat. The old truck filled with the comforting scent of pine air freshener, worn leather, and fresh coffee lingering from that morning. Soft country music played at a low volume, blending with the steady rhythm of rain tapping against the windshield. After several miles, the young woman finally spoke. "I'm sorry if I'm causing trouble." Ethan smiled without taking his eyes off the road. Helping someone is never trouble. She lowered her head, and for the first time since he found her, a small tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away before he could notice, but he had already seen enough to understand that whatever burden she carried could not be solved with questions. When they arrived home, the porch light was already glowing warmly against the darkness. Before Ethan reached the front steps, the front door opened and Lily rushed outside wearing fuzzy slippers and an oversized sweater. She stopped suddenly when she saw the unfamiliar woman beside her father. Ethan knelt beside his daughter. "This young lady needs a warm place to rest tonight," he explained softly. "Can we help her?" Lily looked at the stranger for only a moment before offering the gentle smile that reminded Ethan so much of his late wife. "Of course," she answered without hesitation. "I will make hot chocolate." Inside the little farmhouse, the crackling fireplace filled the living room with golden light, while the smell of cinnamon drifted from the kitchen. The young woman wrapped both hands around the warm mug Lily placed in front of her. She looked around the modest home with quiet disbelief. Nothing inside was expensive. The furniture showed years of careful use. Family photographs covered the walls. A handmade drawing from Lily hung proudly on the refrigerator. Yet there was something inside that house she had not felt in longer than she could remember. Peace. As Ethan quietly prepared the guest room, and Lily folded extra blankets with cheerful determination, the young woman closed her eyes for just a moment, allowing herself to believe that for one night, she no longer had to pretend to be anyone except someone who desperately needed kindness. Morning arrived quietly, carrying the comforting aroma of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and blueberry pancakes drifting through the little farmhouse. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting warm golden patterns across the worn wooden floor. Claire slowly opened her eyes, confused for a brief moment before the memories of the rainy highway returned. She sat up carefully, surprised to find clean, folded clothes waiting on the chair beside the bed, along with a handwritten note in careful lettering. Take your time. Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Ethan and Lily. She stared at the note for several seconds, almost unable to remember the last time someone had expected nothing from her except that she should rest. Downstairs, laughter floated through the house. Lily was proudly attempting to flip pancakes, while Ethan patiently pretended not to notice every oddly shaped one landing on the plate. When Claire stepped into the kitchen, both of them looked up at the same time. There were no uncomfortable questions. No suspicious glances. Only simple smiles that made the room feel even warmer. Good morning, Ethan said. I hope you slept well. Claire nodded softly. Better than I have in a very long time. Lily immediately pulled out a chair beside her. Dad says pancakes taste better if they are a little crooked, she declared with complete confidence. Ethan chuckled. That is because perfection has never made breakfast taste any better. Claire could not help smiling as she accepted the steaming plate. Every bite reminded her of weekends she barely remembered from childhood, before meetings, expectations, cameras, and endless schedules had quietly replaced family mornings. While they ate, Ethan spoke mostly with Lily about school projects, soccer practice, and whether the pumpkin patch would still be open the following weekend. Claire noticed something remarkable. Ethan listened carefully every time Lily spoke, never checking a phone, never rushing the conversation, never making her feel like she was competing for his attention. After breakfast, Claire insisted on helping wash the dishes. Ethan thanked her but told her she was their guest. Lily disagreed immediately. Guests become friends when they dry the dishes, she announced with a grin. Claire laughed, picked up a towel, and joined them. For nearly half an hour, the three of them worked side by side, talking about favorite movies, old family recipes, and the changing colors of autumn leaves. It felt astonishingly ordinary, yet somehow more meaningful than the elegant charity galas and executive dinners Claire had attended throughout her life. Later that morning, Ethan stepped outside to repair a loose porch railing before winter arrived. Claire watched him quietly through the kitchen window before carrying a toolbox onto the porch. I can hold the boards, she offered. Ethan looked surprised. You do not have to. I know, she answered gently. I would like to. As they worked together, Claire instinctively handed him each tool before he asked for it. She measured angles accurately, noticed small structural details, and suggested reinforcing one section that would better withstand heavy snow. Ethan raised an eyebrow with quiet curiosity. You have done this before? Claire hesitated for only a second before smiling politely. Not exactly. I suppose I have simply watched people solve problems for a long time. Ethan accepted the answer without pressing further. He had learned years ago that trust grew stronger when people were allowed to reveal their stories at their own pace. Neither of them noticed a black luxury sedan parked nearly a quarter-mile away beyond the tree line. Inside, two professionally dressed individuals studied a tablet, displaying Claire's photograph beside the words, "Possible confirmed sighting." One quietly picked up a phone and spoke only a single sentence. Inform Miss Lancaster. We believe we have found her daughter. That afternoon, the peaceful rhythm of the little farmhouse continued as though the outside world had simply forgotten it existed. Claire helped Lily gather fallen apples from the old orchard behind the house, laughing each time one slipped from the basket and rolled down the gentle hillside. Ethan watched them from the porch while replacing a loose board on the front steps, quietly grateful to hear his daughter laugh so freely again. It had been a long time since another adult had brought such light into their home. Claire noticed simple things she had never appreciated before. The crisp scent of pine carried by the autumn breeze. The distant sound of cattle grazing beyond the neighboring fence. The satisfaction of folding warm laundry fresh from the clothesline. Every ordinary moment seemed to calm a part of her heart that had been restless for years. Yet beneath that growing peace, fragments of memory began returning without warning. A polished conference room overlooking downtown Seattle. Endless Kamerafliches. A chauffeured car waiting outside a towering office building. Her mother standing before a board of directors with absolute confidence, while reminding her that the Lancaster family name carried responsibilities far greater than personal happiness. Claire quietly paused beside the clothesline as another memory surfaced. She remembered leaving an elegant charity gala the previous evening after another disagreement with Victoria. It had not been an argument filled with anger, but with exhaustion. Claire had confessed that she no longer knew who she was outside the expectations attached to her last name. Victoria, burdened by decades of protecting both her family and her company, had answered with practical advice instead of comfort. Claire had walked away, needing only silence. The rain had begun shortly afterward. She remembered boarding a rideshare vehicle, asking the driver to keep going without any destination in mind, then eventually stepping out alone onto the quiet highway where Ethan found her. Meanwhile, nearly 100 miles away, the headquarters of Lancaster Global Industries remained unusually subdued. Television screens displayed continuous news coverage discussing the unexplained disappearance of the chief executive officer's only daughter. Financial analysts speculated about corporate instability while reporters gathered outside the headquarters hoping for any update. Inside the executive conference room, Victoria Lancaster stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. She had not slept. Her normally composed expression revealed quiet concern that no public interview could hide. One of her senior security directors entered carrying a digital tablet. "We have a possible location," he said carefully. "Our investigators traced surveillance footage from a county gas station yesterday evening. We believe Miss Lancaster may be staying near Pine Creek." Victoria closed her eyes briefly before opening them with renewed determination. "No media," she replied calmly. "No unnecessary attention. I want everyone to remember that before she is my daughter in the public eye, she is simply my daughter." Back at the farmhouse, Claire helped Lily finish a school art project using colored leaves gathered from the yard. Ethan smiled as he watched them work together around the kitchen table. He noticed that Claire seemed quieter than before, occasionally staring out the window as if listening to distant thoughts. He considered asking whether she was feeling better, but instead he simply placed a fresh cup of hot tea beside her. Claire looked up with grateful eyes. "You always seem to know exactly what someone needs," she said softly. Ethan shrugged with his familiar, gentle smile. "Sometimes people do not need answers. Sometimes they only need a place where they can breathe." Claire lowered her eyes, deeply moved by words that carried more comfort than anything wealth or influence had ever been able to provide, unaware that by the following sunrise, the peaceful refuge she had unexpectedly found would no longer remain a secret. The following morning arrived with an unusual stillness that Ethan could not quite explain. The sunrise painted the surrounding hills in soft shades of gold, while a thin layer of mist drifted across the open fields beyond the farmhouse. Lily skipped happily toward the mailbox, carrying a basket of fresh muffins she planned to deliver to their elderly neighbor before school. Claire stood on the front porch holding a warm cup of coffee, breathing in the cool autumn air as though she wanted to remember every peaceful second. For the first time in years, She felt no pressure to check a schedule, answer endless messages, or prepare for another carefully managed public appearance. The quiet simplicity of Ethan's home had become something she never realized she had been searching for. Ethan stepped outside, carrying his toolbox, before heading to the garage for another ordinary workday. "Feeling better today?" he asked with his familiar calm smile. Claire nodded. "I almost forgot what normal feels like." Ethan looked toward the distant tree line where morning sunlight filtered through the tall pines. "Normal is different for everyone," he replied. "Sometimes we only recognize it after life slows down long enough for us to notice." Claire lowered her eyes, thoughtfully turning those words over in her mind. Before she could answer, the faint sound of approaching engines echoed through the valley. Ethan glanced toward the gravel road, expecting perhaps a delivery truck or one of his neighbors. Instead, several dark luxury sport utility vehicles appeared one after another, moving steadily toward the farmhouse. Their polished black exteriors reflected the morning light as they slowed to a respectful stop outside the front gate. Claire's expression changed immediately. The peaceful smile faded from her face, replaced by quiet recognition. Her fingers tightened around the coffee mug as memories returned with complete clarity. Ethan noticed the change before looking back toward the vehicles. Men and women dressed in professional business attire stepped out calmly rather than aggressively, speaking softly into communication earpieces while maintaining respectful distance from the house. Lily returned from the mailbox, slowing her steps as she looked curiously at the unexpected visitors. Ethan gently rested one hand on her shoulder without taking his eyes off the driveway. A few moments later, the rear door of the final vehicle opened. Victoria Lancaster stepped onto the gravel with composed dignity, dressed in an elegant charcoal coat that contrasted sharply with the rustic countryside surrounding her. She stood silently for several seconds, her attention fixed entirely on Claire. Neither woman spoke. Years of complicated conversations, impossible expectations, quiet disappointments, and unspoken love seemed to fill the space between them. Claire slowly placed the untouched coffee cup on the porch railing. Ethan turned toward her, suddenly understanding that the woman he had welcomed into his home belonged to a world far different from his own. Yet he felt no disappointment, no anger, and no regret. He simply hoped she had found the peace she seemed to need. Victoria finally took a careful step forward, her voice calm but filled with unmistakable emotion. "Claire," she said softly, "I've been looking everywhere for you." Claire looked briefly toward Ethan and Lily before meeting her mother's eyes again. The silence that followed carried more meaning than words ever could. Standing between the quiet farmhouse that had given her comfort and the life she had left behind, Claire realized that the next choice she made would shape not only her own future, but the lives of everyone who had unexpectedly become part of her story. Victoria Lancaster slowly walked across the gravel driveway without the slightest trace of arrogance. Yet the quiet confidence she carried had been shaped by decades of leading one of the largest companies in the country. Her executive team remained several yards behind, understanding without being told that this was not a business meeting. It was a mother searching for her daughter. Claire took a slow breath before stepping off the porch. The distance between them seemed impossibly small and impossibly large at the same time. Ethan remained beside Lily, neither interrupting nor withdrawing. He sensed that this moment belonged to them, but he also knew that if Claire needed a friend, she would not stand alone. Victoria's eyes softened as she looked at her daughter. "You disappeared without a word," she said quietly. "Do you know how worried I've been?" Claire lowered her gaze for a moment before answering. "I know you were worried, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to disappear long enough to remember who I was." The words settled over the quiet property like the gentle autumn breeze moving through the maple trees. Victoria glanced toward Ethan for the first time. "Mr. Brooks," she said with calm professionalism, "I appreciate that you gave my daughter shelter." Ethan nodded respectfully. Anyone would have done the same. One of the executives standing behind Victoria instinctively shifted forward as if preparing to speak, but Victoria subtly raised one hand, stopping him before a single word could leave his mouth. She had already noticed something unusual. Ethan had not asked who Claire was. He had not tried to impress anyone. He had not even seemed curious about the expensive vehicles parked outside his home. His attention remained on Lily, making sure she felt safe while quietly respecting Claire's space. Claire turned toward Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude. "There is something you deserve to know," she said softly. "My full name is Claire Lancaster." Ethan smiled gently, as though she had simply introduced herself again. "It is nice to finally know your last name." Claire blinked in surprise. "That is all you have to say?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "Your last name does not change the person who sat at my kitchen table yesterday or helped Lily collect apples." Victoria watched the exchange in complete silence. She had spent years watching people react the instant they learned her family name. Some became overly polite. Others became nervous. Many immediately saw opportunity. Yet this mechanic standing before her seemed entirely unchanged. Lily looked up at Claire with innocent curiosity. "Does that mean your mom is the lady from television?" Claire smiled faintly. "Sometimes." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "She looks much taller on television." The unexpected comment drew the first genuine smile from Victoria that morning, and even several members of the executive team quietly laughed under their breath. The tension that had filled the driveway only moments earlier eased almost instantly. Claire stepped closer to her mother. "Mom, they never asked for anything. They did not even ask my last name. They simply treated me like family." Victoria looked around the modest farmhouse, noticing the patched porch, the aging pickup truck, the handmade flower boxes beneath the windows, and the warmth that seemed to exist naturally within those ordinary surroundings. For the first time in many years, she began to wonder whether the greatest gift anyone had given her daughter was not protection, wealth, or influence, but something infinitely simpler. They had given Claire a place where she did not have to earn love before receiving it. And that quiet truth left even one of the most powerful women in America searching carefully for the right words. Claire slowly walked toward her mother until only a few feet separated them. The cool autumn breeze stirred the fallen leaves around their shoes, but neither woman seemed to notice. Victoria searched her daughter's face with quiet relief. Yet behind that relief lingered years of misunderstanding that neither success nor wealth had ever managed to erase. Claire gently reached for her mother's hands. "Mom, I know you came because you love me," she said softly. "I have never doubted that. But somewhere along the way, I forgot how to live without trying to become the person everyone expected me to be." Victoria lowered her eyes, allowing the words to settle before answering. "Everything I built was meant to protect you," she replied. "I believed giving you every opportunity was the same as giving you happiness." Claire smiled sadly. "You gave me opportunities. Ethan and Lily reminded me what happiness actually feels like." The quiet honesty in her voice left the entire driveway silent. Even the executives standing near the vehicles seemed to look away, sensing they were witnessing something deeply personal. Claire turned toward Ethan, who remained beside the porch with Lily. "When he found me on the roadside, he never asked who I was. He never searched my purse. He never wondered whether I could repay him. He only asked if I was cold." She paused as emotion gently filled her voice. "When I arrived here, Lily shared her favorite blanket without hesitation. Ethan gave me the guest room. They invited me to breakfast. They laughed with me, trusted me, and treated me like I belonged before they knew anything about me." Victoria looked toward the modest farmhouse once again. The peeling paint, the repaired porch railing, the old pickup truck, and the flower boxes beneath the windows suddenly seemed far more valuable than the marble entrance of her corporate headquarters. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying being the center of attention. "Miss Lancaster," he said respectfully, "any family would have done the same." Claire gently shook her head. "No, Ethan, not everyone would have." She looked back at her mother. "Do you know what surprised me the most? He never once tried to impress me. He never complained about his life. He never asked for help. He simply lived with quiet dignity." Lily stepped closer and slipped her small hand into Claire's. "Dad says people are more important than problems," she said with innocent sincerity. "That makes hard days easier." Victoria felt her eyes begin to glisten. She had attended countless leadership conferences where experts spoke for hours about purpose, trust, and human connection. Yet a little girl had expressed the truth in a single sentence. Slowly, Victoria approached Ethan. Every executive instinct told the people around her that something important was about to happen. She extended her hand. "Mr. Brooks," she said with genuine humility, "thank you for caring for my daughter when you had every reason to walk away." Ethan accepted the handshake with his usual calm smile. She only needed a safe place to breathe for a little while. Victoria nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is exactly what I forgot to give her." Claire watched the exchange with quiet gratitude as the invisible distance separating the two worlds began to disappear. In that peaceful corner of rural Oregon, surrounded by weathered wood, golden leaves, and simple kindness, the measure of success was no longer found in boardrooms, stock prices, or headlines. It was found in the courage to choose compassion before judgment, dignity before pride, and family before everything else. Several months passed, and winter quietly surrendered to the first gentle signs of spring. The old farmhouse looked much the same as it always had. Fresh paint now covered the porch railing Ethan had repaired, colorful flowers bloomed beneath the front windows, and Lily's bicycle rested against the same oak tree where she had left it countless afternoons before. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Every morning, Ethan unlocked the doors of Miller Auto Repair before sunrise, greeted longtime customers with the same humble smile, and spent his days repairing engines with the same honesty that had earned the town's respect long before anyone had ever heard the name Claire Lancaster. He never spoke about the extraordinary morning when a convoy of luxury vehicles had appeared outside his home. When neighbors asked questions, he simply smiled and changed the subject. To Ethan, kindness had never been an investment expecting a return. It was simply the right thing to do. Claire, however, never forgot. Although she had returned to Seattle alongside her mother, something fundamental had changed within her. The endless calendar of meetings became smaller. The carefully managed public appearances became fewer. She persuaded Victoria to establish new programs supporting working families, single parents, and small community businesses across rural America. Every proposal she presented carried the same quiet philosophy she had learned inside one modest farmhouse. People were not numbers. They were stories. Victoria herself changed in ways few inside Lancaster Global Industries could fully explain. Employees noticed she now left the office earlier whenever possible. Executive meetings began with conversations about people instead of quarterly reports. She listened more than she spoke. Somewhere between losing her daughter for one frightening night and finding her again beside a weathered porch, one of the most powerful business leaders in the country had rediscovered the value of simply being present. One bright Saturday afternoon, a familiar black sport utility vehicle turned onto Ethan's gravel driveway. But this time there were no security teams, no executives, and no sense of urgency. Only Victoria and Claire stepped out carrying homemade pies they insisted they had baked themselves. Lily ran across the yard with joyful excitement before Claire even reached the porch. Ethan laughed as he welcomed them inside, where fresh coffee already filled the kitchen with its familiar, comforting aroma. Conversation came easily now. They spoke about school, gardening, fishing, old family recipes, and plans for the coming summer. No one mentioned wealth. No one discussed corporate mergers or financial markets. Those subjects somehow seemed far less important around Ethan's worn wooden table. As the sun slowly settled behind the distant hills, Victoria stood quietly on the porch beside Ethan. "You know," she said with a thoughtful smile, "I spent years believing success meant building something the entire world could admire." Ethan looked across the fields where Lily and Claire laughed together while planting wildflowers near the fence. "And now," he asked gently. Victoria's eyes followed the simple scene before her. "Now, I think success is building something the people you love never want to leave." Ethan nodded without saying another word. He did not need to. The evening breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers across the quiet countryside, while laughter echoed softly through the fading daylight. Sometimes miracles did not arrive with headlines, applause, or extraordinary celebrations. Sometimes they arrived as a warm meal shared around an old kitchen table, a stranger welcomed without judgment, a little girl willing to share a favorite blanket, and a single act of kindness offered with no expectation of reward. In the end, it was never wealth that transformed those lives. It was quiet dignity, unconditional compassion, and the simple courage to see a human being before seeing anything else.